Hello, and welcome to another Fantasy Premier League video. My name is Steve, and it was a week of carnage for my team due to the international break and the upcoming Champions League fixtures in midweek. I got battered by last-minute international call-ups to players like João Pedro getting himself left off the team sheet entirely. He was called up very late in the piece. I got a benching to save the legs of key players like Gvardiol in defense. Diogo Jota also only made 59 minutes running off the pitch, coming off 5 seconds before he would have earned an extra point for making it to the 60-minute mark. So he was also clearly being saved for the Champions League fixtures midweek. I also copped an injury to Isak as he looks to have injured his eye just before half time, seeing him not appear in the second 45. So a bit of a rough week, all things considered. I also have some serious questions about Chelsea's ability to attack given the last two performances, which I will break down in this video, explaining who I think is at fault for the lack of Chelsea's forward momentum. And given the injuries, loans, team sheet adjustments that happened in game week 4, poor performances, and key players losing penalties, I think I am actually going to be wildcarding in game week 5. So before we jump into it, remember to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, especially if you get any value out of the following content. And as always, I've left the timestamps below so you can jump through to the sections that interest you the most. Right, so the Palmer versus Saka discussion. So this section is largely going to be about Chelsea and how they are attacking and how that overall actually ends up affecting Palmer and his ability to score FPL points. Now, Palmer played in a match that broke the Premier League record for the most number of yellow cards in a single match. 14 yellow cards were handed out on the weekend, many of which were unnecessary. Lots for talking back to the ref. I think even some of the staff on the sideline ended up getting yellow carded in this match. But anyway, last week I did point out that Enzo Fernandez had a particularly off game where most of his forward passes were incomplete, losing possession of the ball, meaning that Chelsea's whole attack was breaking down as a result, effectively starving Palmer and the forward line of possession. Now, in the game against Bournemouth, Chelsea were actually still down in personnel. It actually turned out to be some pretty key players. Gusto was still injured. Reece James, although not too key to what I think is going on at Chelsea, but he was also still out, meaning they had to play Dizazi in at right back, who had a bit of a disaster performance. But also Enzo Fernandez was not on the team sheet through illness, and we had Vega playing in his spot as the other CDM, meant to be CDM slash CM, given what we have seen up until game week 4. So Maresca lined up Chelsea in a bit more of a traditional 4-2-3-1 this week. There was Sanchez and net, came away with a penalty save and a clean sheet, earned himself 15 points. But across the backline, we had Dizazi in at right back. The rest of the backline unchanged with Fofana, Colwill, and Cucurella. Caicedo was still in CDM with Vega sitting in beside him instead of Enzo Fernandez, who was out through illness. And the front line was unchanged with Madueke on the right, Palmer as Cam, Neto out on the left, and Jackson playing up front. However, there were massive issues with Chelsea going forward, and a lot of it was actually, well, key people in defense and in the center of the park. So in the first 3 game weeks of the season, Maresca has been using a 3-2-4-1 system when Chelsea have had possession of the ball. But against Bournemouth, he was playing much more of a 4-2-3-1 system. And I would like to say it was a more traditional 4-2-3-1 system, but typically in a 4-2-3-1 system, the right back and left back are tasked with getting forward, either as wide overlapping runners or to tuck inside the winger, creating overloads for the opposition to deal with. There was absolutely none of that against Bournemouth this weekend. I'm going to start this off by saying Disasi should not be playing right back at all. He is unwilling to venture forward, even when his teammates were urging him to do so by kind of trying to get him to shuffle forward, and he still wouldn't do it. He doesn't seem to want to play many progressive passes forward either. And also, when he needs to turn and sprint after an attacker, he doesn't seem to want to do that either. So it's actually a bit of a disaster performance from Disasi, getting himself pulled off at the 61st minute mark. Now the other wingback, of which Cucurella didn't really do a lot of this game week, he got forward a little bit, but he was marking Semenyo, who was arguably Bournemouth's most dangerous attacker. And so we didn't really see any of the defensive line getting forward to create any sort of overloads for Chelsea. In fact, I think Colwell was the only man to make a run out of the defensive line and actually made it quite far up the pitch in one of his runs and was in a great position to attack. But he must have got a nosebleed being too high up the pitch, stopping his run as he didn't seem to know what to do, even though he'd actually started a really decent attack. Now, not having Gusto in the side severely detriments Chelsea's ability to attack, which is actually quite worrying, as you shouldn't really be relying on just your right back in order to generate the go forward in your team. But Gusto is a serious loss to how effective they are at getting forward. And that is because Gusto is good on the ball. He does make progressive passes. He will run with the ball. He makes passes and moves, and also has an excellent defensive work rate. Now, I should also note here that I don't think that Reece James can fulfill the role that Gusto is doing either, based on what I did see in the little that he was playing in pre-season. James doesn't seem to work too well in the tight spaces, as he's not playing too many 1-2s with any sort of quick dynamic movement when going forward. And he was also a little bit laboured getting around the pitch and seemed to be finding it hard to track back quickly when he did in fact get higher up the pitch in pre-season. And so it's really Gusto at right back, and Cucurella if he could get forward, but he was too busy marking Semenyo, which was one of the big downfalls which is why Chelsea weren't really generating enough forward momentum. But also there are issues in the CM-CDM role as well. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, I did call out Enzo Fernandez for his lack of forward pass completions, but Vega came into the side for Enzo Fernandez and played very much a CDM role, not venturing forward pretty much at all, with most of his passes being sideways or backwards. With no passes going forward, there's really not a hell of a lot moving Chelsea up the pitch. And then when the ball finally gets across to right back, Disasi also doesn't want to run with the ball forward into space or play the ball forward into players that are under a little bit of pressure, and so the ball was just always going backwards or sideways. Caicedo, sitting beside Vega, is also not particularly forward-thinking. He is usually the man that holds back when Enzo is on the pitch. He stays as the holding CDM, and so he is more inclined to be doing that and one of the two, either Caicedo or Vega, did need to venture forward, and that just wasn't happening, which was starving the front line of possession. And when they did have possession, there weren't as many passing options available, as all the defenders were sitting back in the defensive line. So what do Chelsea need? Well, long story short, Chelsea need a central midfielder who can play progressive passes. Now, I do still think this will be Enzo Fernandez. He was just having an off game a couple of weeks ago with just all of his forward passes just being intercepted or wayward or going out of play. But we do need a central midfielder that's going to be a box-to-box runner, lots of forward movement, lots of passes forward, and ideally he needs some sort of attacking threat on him as well, so that he does need to be marked more seriously by the defensive line, providing a little bit more space for the rest of the attacking unit. There was just none of that in this game against Bournemouth at the weekend. So for Palmer to be effective, he needs assistance from those wing-backs and whoever the box-to-box midfielder is going to be. Maybe João Felix potentially be tried out as a box-to-box midfielder, but I am not at all sure what his defensive attributes are like. So there's lots for Chelsea to work on. And in the meantime, I will need to be ditching Palmer as they work on their ability to progress the ball up the pitch. So, is it time to wildcard? So my plan heading into game week 4 was to reassess Palmer, and if he wasn't looking like he could cover Salah, I was going to use my 2 free transfers to bring Salah in for Palmer ahead of Liverpool's match against Bournemouth. Also, with Haaland in my team playing Arsenal this week, I do not really fancy captaining Haaland. I definitely won't be captaining Palmer, having seen Chelsea's inability to attack over the last 2 game weeks. And I was kind of flirting with the idea of maybe holding on to Palmer and giving him another shot and captaining Isak, but he has now only made it 45 minutes on the pitch. Now, it should be said that Salah did also have an off game against Nottingham Forest in the weekend. In fact, Liverpool weren't really clicking as a whole either, but they did have a lot more go forward than Chelsea. It was just Salah having a little bit of an off game. He did still have his chances though, and he could have come away with some points. And that is a lot more than what I saw from Palmer at the weekend. Should note here that full credit to Nottingham Forest. They played a superb game, effectively countering pretty much everything that Liverpool threw at them. And Forest's defense is actually quite underrated and is actually part of the reason why I thought Palmer could outdo Salah, as I did think this would be a lot more of a tricky game for Liverpool than what it looked like on paper. The XGC for about the last 6 or 7 game weeks at the end of last season for Nottingham Forest were pretty good numbers, and they've been looking all right in the start of the 24-25 season as well, and I was kind of banking on them holding Liverpool at bay, which they did do. I was really excited to watch that Chelsea fixture, as I had already seen Salah blank with lots of people captaining him, but Palmer just did not pull through. So I need Salah back this week as a captaincy option, as there's pretty much no one else in my squad that I would look to captain this week in game week 5. Now, around the rest of my squad, Barco has been out of the Brighton squad as he left on loan early on. Harwood Ballas was dropped in game week 4 as Martin made 4 changes, and he cited Southampton's opening 3 games as the reason as to why he made such a change to that Southampton unit. So it looks like Harwood Ballas has actually lost his spot, so I have no defensive coverage on the bench, with only Winks as my only playing bench member who did in fact sub in this week for João Pedro, getting 2 points off the bench, which is about all I am going to be expecting from Winks week on week. Now, Gordon has had a lot of sales across the first 3 game weeks, and I was holding on to him because I thought Wolves would actually be, well, Chelsea destroyed Wolves a couple of weeks ago, and so I thought it was a really good game for Newcastle. And even though Gordon could have had some very big chances, Newcastle just aren't clicking and getting the ball through to him. Now, when Isak went off, Gordon went up front. There was a great move at the end of the game with Murphy picking up the ball. Gordon was off. All he had to do was just lay a ball into space on the floor in front of Gordon, and he had a run-in on goal, one-on-one with the keeper. But Murphy goes with a more difficult cross-field ball to Barnes' far post, and the chance was lost. Uber frustrating to watch. But with the massive amount of sales of Gordon, I'm going to be losing value on him. He's got Fulham this week, and then he runs into some tough fixtures. And so I'm looking like I'm probably going to be needing to ditch Gordon pretty soon. Now, I did manage to divest my Palace exposure a couple of weeks ago by bringing in Raya for a hit 2 weeks ago now. Now, he has already paid that back across the 2 game weeks, putting me 2 points ahead of the 4-point hit that I did take, with Raya scoring 11 points in the 2 game weeks compared to Henderson's 5 points. However, Munoz isn't getting anywhere near enough assist potential, nor do the clean sheets look good at Crystal Palace, and so he is on the chopping block. As I mentioned in the intro, Gvardiol was benched at the start of the City game. He was brought on at half-time for Rico Lewis as Pep looked to manage out the game as Man City actually lost their clean sheet 22 seconds into the match. Now, Guardiola's benching actually is an indication to me that he is firmly first choice, as he was being rested for the Champions League fixture in midweek, and he was trying out Rico Lewis at left back. But the way that the game was going, Pep needed the control in that left back spot, and so Lewis went off at halftime for Gvardiol. Gvardiol did actually make a marauding run forward and set up a great chance for Savinho, who put in his shot, was saved by the outstretched leg of the keeper. That assist would have been really useful this week with all these 1 and 2 pointers around the squad. But I'm still going to be worried about Gvardiol with the next Champions League week coming up. Will he even be on the team sheet to start the match? I'm a little unsure about that moving forward. Eze looks to have given his penalties over to Mateta, as they earned a penalty in order to claw back, I think it was to claw back the draw in the game. Mateta stood up to sink the penalty and get his first brace of the season. Now, João Pedro will be fine in that Brighton squad. He was called up very late to international duty and had to play for Brazil, which is almost certainly why he was left off the team sheet for Brighton at the weekend. So there's no problems there, even though, well, there could potentially be a problem there, but I am not at all worried about João Pedro at this point in time. Jota got pulled off at the 59-minute mark, like I already mentioned, which is probably a good sign, as he's also likely still first choice, given the early pull-off, as he is probably being prioritised for the Champions League as well. But that's probably set to continue every game week where there are European matches. And with the new format of the Champions League, all of the top teams are going to have to play some very strong lineups in these Champions League matches. There's no more group stages where there will be some sort of throwaway game where they can play an understrength side anymore. And so that trend is probably going to continue moving forward. So in my squad, the only players that I'm really happy with at the moment is Haaland, João Pedro, Kanate, who I thought had a brilliant game, by the way. I don't think he is at any risk of losing his spot in that Liverpool outfit at the moment. And Raya is the only other player that I am happy with in my squad at the moment. So I'm going to sleep on it, but I don't think I can actually transfer my way out of all of this damage. Now, if I do wildcard this week, I'll have a bit of an issue with Arsenal, given they play City this week. But right now, I don't think that would be enough to deter me from delaying the wildcard until game week 6, which is actually a very common wildcard week out there in the community. Lots of managers are lining up to wildcard in game week 6. I am looking like my team is going to need it in game week 5. But if I do decide to pull the trigger on the wildcard this week, I will need to weigh up whether I wait for the Champions League fixtures in order to pull that trigger to ensure that key players that I'm eyeing up don't get injured. For instance, Mo Salah, if he somehow got injured in that Champions League fixture, it might be enough to make me abandon the wild card altogether and just stick with Cole Palmer for the weekend, as I don't know where else I would potentially go. Or I'll need to make my mind up before tomorrow's price changes and go early in order to catch any price rises if they are going to happen to any of the players that I may want to save value on. So Gordon probably going to be dropping in price. Eze blanked again. He might start to pick up some sales. Isak was already trending down heading into this game week. Now he's only come out with a 45-minute appearance and a 1-pointer. Vardy already had some heavy sales heading into the game week as well. Getting benched at the start of the game week is going to have even more sales for him. So there could be quite a lot of value that I might potentially lose at tomorrow's price changes in the afternoon. I do have 2 free transfers this game week, but I think it might be best to just bank them, build a wildcard team, and then come out of the wildcard in game week 6 with 2 free transfers in the bank as a bit of insurance. And all right, well, that wraps up my early thoughts for the game week. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a comment to tell us what you think. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next time.